I am Red. I'm an artist, researcher, mother, and survivor of domestic abuse. And I'm here to tell you about my ambition to build a model that brings art into dialogue with political and legal systems. Art is a language. It conveys truth before judgment and assumption can get in the way. Neuroscience tells us that our brains respond faster to visual images. This allows us to feel an experience and lets empathy emerge almost immediately. That's why art matters, because it can give a voice to people who are silenced by legal systems, and it can translate trauma into something that systems can see. And you all have a part to play in this process, because you can take this idea and you can transform your own environment. I first began to paint after I left an abusive relationship. My inspiration was Frida Kahlo, a Mexican artist from the early 20th century. She painted about the way that love could break you over and over again. And she used self-portraiture to express her identity and her physical suffering. Frida first began to paint when she was confined to bed, immobile and isolated, after an accident in a tram. And she always said she had two accidents. The first one was the crash, and the second one was her husband, Diego Rivera. It's well documented that she suffered deep emotional pain in that relationship. I also started to paint as I was confined to bed, my deep emotional pain causing the physical embodiment of PTSD. The image you can see on the screen is called The Moth, and it's about my realization that I had loved like a moth flickering around a false light. So art wasn't something I did. It became a rebellion and a reclaiming of myself, and it became my life story. For example, I wanted to paint a 7-foot high canvas. It was called And Who Will Die? And it was about the fact that I had lost someone who meant absolutely everything to me, and that I'd loved a lie, and that part of me had died along with the illusion. I had to stand on a chair to paint the upper parts. And while I painted, I listened to the classical pianist Rachmaninoff, which reminded me of the good times, and I sobbed into that canvas. When it was finished, people said they could feel the anguish that I'd painted. I wanted to borrow a coffin to study for this piece of work, so I phoned a local undertaker who agreed to lend me one for a week. And they delivered it to my house in full uniform in a hearse because they'd just been to a funeral. So in the preceding days, my neighbour had been really, really horrible to my friend about her parking outside my house, even though he knew that I was really ill with a serious heart condition. She reiterated that, but he didn't really care. It didn't occur to me that my neighbour may have misunderstood the coffin delivery until a few days later, when I unwittingly terrified him. I bumped into him in a bookshop. He was like, ah! So I can't show you that painting because it's too graphic. But that's the point, because some of my friends and family and even my university turned away from my work because I painted with an openness and an honesty and a rawness that people found embarrassing. And they would say, oh, can't you paint something nice? Or what about some pet portraits? But I had many friends who did support me, so I continued to paint. And I built a collection of over 30 artworks, including drawings, collage, oil and acrylic paintings. And I even did an MA in painting during the process. And after about 8 years, I applied to Arts Council England, who awarded me the funding to do an artist residency in Mexico City and to visit Frida Kahlo's 2 homes. And I thought, I've got permission to finish my story in paint now. And, that will be it. But what happened was that I didn't realize that something else had already begun. This was the catalyst for something else. I stood in the place that Frida had been when she looked over the balcony into her husband's studio and saw him having sex with her sister. And I visualized the paintings that she had created after that moment, and I felt like I was standing in her shoes. I also went to La Casa Azul, the blue house where Frida had lived for most of her life. There I was in the studio of Frida Kahlo, looking at myself in the mirror that she'd used to paint her face, and time stood still. The people in the queue behind me could wait, because even when I'd lost confidence in myself, I dared to keep painting because Frida had dared before me. And now I was standing amongst her paints and breathing in the air in the very room that she had created her work. It was a pivotal moment in my life. So I photographed my image there, my reflection. It inspired this piece of work called I Followed Your Example, and it led to me painting myself in your mirror. I think that the residency changed people's view of my work because all of a sudden the story had a happy ending. And I called my collection We Learned to Fly, inspired by Frida's words. 2 months later, at my first solo exhibition, the opening night was absolutely packed. And I spoke and held everyone's undivided attention, and I was watching them lean into every single piece of my work. I realised that as a survivor of domestic abuse who had been silenced legally, socially, and culturally, that I'd given myself a voice, and that I didn't need permission anymore because I'd created my own language. The question remained, how could I help other women who have been silenced? I realised now I was reaching women around the world with a common experience. The WHO states that roughly 1 in 3 women globally will experience abuse in their lifetime. Many cases go unreported, so that figure is undoubtedly higher. When women do report, they are silenced legally, socially, and culturally. During and after violence, many women feel blame, shame, and judgment. For women who experience domestic abuse, it starts with love. It starts with security and comfort, and a bonding sense of safety that's whipped away in an unexpected strike, and it leaves you like a rabbit in the headlights, and often there are children involved. According to the Domestic Abuse Commissioner's Office, 87% of family court cases involve an allegation of domestic abuse. And women's aid reports suggest that survivors frequently feel that their voice is minimized within institutional responses. When women act to protect their children, natural responses of fight, flight, fawn, and freeze are inevitable. And this is misunderstood as psychological instability. It's an inherent misunderstanding. According to Dr. Lucy Johnson and Professor Mary Boyle, it's ideological power that's used to individualize problems and label women as bad or mentally ill. C100 is the name of the form that you use to apply for the family courts. My painting, called C100, is both about my experience and also my absolute astonishment that I wasn't uniquely bad at navigating the family courts. So I wanted to contribute meaningfully to discussions that were taking place in the family court. And I knew that emotional insight alone wasn't enough. So I had to translate what had happened to me into research. So I teamed up with Dr. Kim Hayes, who is a reader at Manchester Metropolitan University, and she very kindly guided me through my first academic paper. The focus was Judith Herman, who reminded me that simply being heard is a powerful step towards regaining yourself and your power and your story and in healing. What came out of the research was a conviction that art therapy offers a multifaceted intervention, one that supports healing, collective storytelling, and also opens pathways to greater understanding and equity. So a year ago, I teamed up with Biddy. Biddy is a clinical art psychotherapist. And together we formed Becoming Arethusa, a community interest company. Arethusa was a Greek nymph, and she was relentlessly pursued by the god Alpheus, who was a male oppressor. And with the help of a female called Artemis, she transformed herself and she escaped to triumph. So Becoming Arethusa is about self-transformation, emergence, and collective meaning-making. We use Dr. Lucy Johnson and Professor Mary Boyle's power threat meaning framework, which means we're not asking what's wrong with you, we're asking what happened to you, how did power operate, and what meaning did you make of it? I co-facilitate while Biddy delivers art therapy. We're seeing women create striking artwork and growing confidence and trust. Our dream has been perfectly captured in an artwork by Anthony Gormley. It's a powerful metaphor for the model that we're building. So I want you all to imagine this. Sculpture for Derry walls. Two identical figures. They're made from cast iron. They're back to back, merged and hollow inside. And the two figures represent two very different religious communities who are bound together and conjoined. And the sculpture asks the viewer to peek through the eyes on one side and look out through the eyes of the other. And the fact that the two figures are bound symbolizes that although they're from different communities, they are the same. And this creates an opportunity for empathy. Through Becoming Arethusa, women's artwork is seen at conference and exhibition. Every brushstroke, every image is not just art, it's testimony that's creating an opportunity for those in power to actually feel what it is like to experience abuse and the family court system. So imagine if we could take this model and use it in other environments, schools, hospitals, benefit systems, where people who are traumatized and marginalized are often overlooked. If art can help us feel before we judge, then empathy becomes a practice. We can all change the way we see, and sometimes it's through something as disarmingly simple as having the courage to stand in their shoes. Thank you.